are in the world. I'm hugely delighted to have Dr. Rick Spence with us. He is a historian with a breathtaking knowledge on a range of subjects, including the Illuminati, MK Ultra, secret societies, the intelligence agencies. So it covers so many of the topics we've had and discussed on this channel. And if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. And we've also got Dr. Spence's links in the description box. So huge thank you for coming on, first of all.
Thank you.
I'd like to go over some of the basic terminology before we go deep down some rabbit holes. So the first thing I would like to ask is, where did the term conspiracy theory come from? And what was the reason it came about?
What the term conspiracy theory? That's an interesting question. Where was the first place that was ever used? And the simple answer is, I don't know. But it's a let's put it this way. Let's take it apart. You've got conspiracy, you've got theory. A theory is basically a hypothesis. So the whole idea, roughly, I'm not a scientist, but the idea is that you collect information, you collect data, you organize the data, and then from that data, you try to develop a theory or hypothesis about what may be. That not necessarily, but a theory is always that. It's just it could be this, might be something else. Now, some people develop theories and cling to them dear life and exclude all other possibilities, which I'd modestly argue is probably the wrong way to go about it. Okay, if you can't prove it, don't say that you have. One of the things that I'm accused of on more than one occasion, and in some cases fairly, is of being indefinite and wishy-washy about things. But the reason for that is that, again, I don't know, and I'm not going to say that I do. And I think that it's one of those things that very often with little information, people become quite certain about things. So the theory is a hypothesis. It's not a fact. Then you've got the term conspiracy. So here, let's come up with a definition, because often it seems that they get the view that all conspiracies are theories, which is on the assumption that conspiracies don't really exist outside of people's fevered imaginations. So if you're talking about there being a conspiracy, then obviously, well, you're paranoid. So a conspiracy is this. It's two or more people. You have to have at least two. One can't do it on their own. Two or more people working together secretly to attain a common end or goal. So two or more people working together secretly, that's the key part there, to attain a common end. Now, you see other versions of that definition that will say to attain a criminal end or to attain an evil end of some kind, because obviously if people are conspiring, they must be up to something bad. But it doesn't have to contain that. So let's keep it as simple as possible. The end they wish to attain may be criminal, it may be evil, it may be benign. The key word I noted is that they do this secretly. So conspire or conspiracy comes back to, like most things, from a Latin word, I think it's conspirare, which meant to breathe together. That's the original meaning of the word, to sort of do something in unison, which gives it this idea of working together. So exactly what it is a conspiracy seeks to achieve is in the minds of the conspirators. But they're doing this secretly because they want to have a very sort of limited group of people who are in on this. Now, that could be everything from plotting to overthrow a government. Okay, and those things are quite true. So it's not difficult. If somebody tells you that all conspiracies are imaginary, well, what example could we use?
The Illuminati.
Assassination. The Illuminati. But you don't even have to. You don't have to do that. You can look in history and find every revolution or coup d'etat which has taken place involves a conspiracy. Because if you're going to plot the overthrow of a government, you have to do that in secret. Because if you don't, well, then you'll end up in a firing squad before noon. All right, the existing order will not just let you do that unless they're extraordinarily incompetent. But you have to conspire. Politics is often conspiratorial because you want to keep people in the dark about things. But let's just take an example of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, most people tend to think of it as John Wilkes Booth, but you don't have to look very far to realize that Booth was part of what? He was part of a conspiracy. There was a whole group of people, and there was a larger plan of which the killing of Lincoln was only a part. Another example would be the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in 1914. You know, the assassination that would be the spark for World War I, kind of important. And there again, it's not just, it's one guy that shoots him, but he's all part of a much larger conspiracy. So people, conspiracy, in fact, there's nothing really spooky about it. People do that all the time. So let me give you a kind of mundane example of a possible conspiracy. Some people will probably be able to identify with this. Let's say that you and a group of friends are planning on doing something, and you're going to go, you all decide you're going to go to a party, you're going to go to do something, and there's a question as to who's going to be invited, and somebody pipes up and go, do we have to bring Bob? Because Bob apparently has been problematic. Maybe Bob tends to party a little too hard, and he's kind of a pain in the rear when you bring him along. So after a little discussion among just you decide that you're not going to tell Bob about the party, and he will never know that the rest of you went without him. You have just conspired against Bob. Bob is the victim. See, that's how simple a conspiracy can be. It's two or more people working together secretly to attain a common end. In this case, you want to go to the party and you don't want to bring Bob, but you still want to keep him around as a friend. So now think about it. People do that stuff all the time. People conspire constantly. It's a matter of, part of it's just a management of information. I mean, I think probably most people, if you're lucky, you haven't, but most people have probably been part of a committee. You ever been at work or somewhere else where you're on a committee or a group, or maybe it's part of a club you belong to? And you know what committees are like. The bigger they are, the less they accomplish. And the smaller you can keep a decision-making group, the easier it is to make decisions. Because every person you add to a decision-making group is going to have a slightly different opinion, and then someone is going to come up with this. So just exclude as many Bobs as you possibly can. Just the people that you really want there. So even in some cases, the selection or the appointment of a committee can operate as a kind of conspiracy, because someone who's decided who's going to be on that committee and who isn't. They're just easier to manage. I mean, think of it this way. Conspiracies are just a way of doing business. That's the simplest way I can put it.
Well, thank you for that.
Nothing really
What
weird.
about, let's go to the next term that I'm interested in, which is the Illuminati. What's the history of that term?
Okay, the Illuminati. Well, the term itself just means the enlightened. You have seen the light. What light? What is it you have been enlightened to? See, that's the question. So the definition is pretty simple. An illuminatus is one who has been illuminated to something, who has been made aware of something. The term has been around, it's most famously connected in the modern sphere to the Bavarian Illuminati. We'll come back to them in a minute, but really the term has been around since, well, if you go back to the Roman Empire, you would find that it was a term generally used for anyone who was the member of what was called a mystery religion. Because in those mystery religions, sometimes they're called mystery cults, which gives them a more stranger definition than they need. But these were religions into which people were initiated. They're sort of a religious secret society. You go in, you are initiated, you go through, you often swear oaths of secrecy to never talk about what you've been illuminated to. But that's all that it meant. In fact, early Christians referred to themselves by exactly the same term. They were illuminated to the Gospels. Everybody used the term. So it's been used by a wide variety of groups across history because it's simply a fairly common operative term. Somebody who's been illuminated or made aware of something. So it's not invented by Adam Weishaupt. It's been around for centuries before he got there. And so when we get to 18th century Bavaria and to the city of Ingolstadt and to the Jesuit-run university there, that's where in the 1770s you find a fellow by the name of Adam Weishaupt, who is a professor of canon law. So he's a layman himself. He's not a member of the church. He's not a member of the Jesuit order. But he comes from a family of lawyers. His father was a lawyer, most of the people around him. So he's been raised in this whole legalistic atmosphere. He is a professor of religious law, again, a layman. And one of the things that happens in the middle of the 1700s is that the Jesuit order, which had been very powerful and influential in the church and is today, but there was a whole period between, I'm trying to remember, I'd say roughly around 1770 to around 1815. Those dates aren't exact, but that's close. For that period of time, for really a period of well over 30 years, the Jesuit order was suspended. It was banned in the church. There was a lot of internal criticism of it. Some people had argued that it was too powerful, and therefore the Vatican stepped in and suspended the order. It was later restored. So it still exists today. But when the Jesuit order was suspended, the university, the Catholic-run university, still existed. And since you'd now taken the Jesuit clerics out of control, that meant that lay faculty like Adam Weishaupt now had opportunities for advancement. So he went from being basically a mere professor to a kind of dean or department or section chair. He gained in his prestige. But one of the interesting things, though, is that Weishaupt had been trained. His whole education and much of his work life had been under the auspices of the Jesuit order. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but the Jesuits go back to the 1500s, to the 16th century, formed by a guy named Ignatius Loyola. And the idea there was to form a kind of special corps of priests who would combat the Reformation. So one of the things that had happened back in the 1500s was that the Catholic Church lost its monopoly on religious power in the West. It was challenged by what we call Protestantism, the Lutherans, the Calvinists, the Anabaptists, they're all over the place. And to deal with that challenge, to deal with that kind of religious war, the Jesuit order came into being. And it was very militaristic. It was organized almost along military lines, but also the concept of how to combat the Protestant enemy or the heretical enemy. And the simplest way to put it was that you fought them by whatever means you possibly could. So one of the things that even within the Catholic Church that the Jesuits were criticized for was that they embraced a concept in their teaching and their whole approach to knowledge, reality, language, The term is, and I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but if I'm wrong, someone will correct me. Casuistry. Casuistry is sort of, well, another way to think of it is um, reasoning, case-based reasoning. Or the more simple way to put it, the ends justifies the means. So from the standpoint of the Jesuit order, what is our ends? Our end is to preserve and expand the power of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, to defend it against all challenges and enemies. That is the end, and that end is perfect and sanctified. So whatever is done, whatever is said, whatever is committed towards the attainment of that end in the service of the Holy Roman Catholic Church is justified. So that means that you can lie, cheat, murder, and steal. And as long as you pursue that end, it's perfectly okay. And it also gave you the ability to manipulate and twist language. So you know that, remember, Weishaupt is a lawyer. What do lawyers do? What's the whole point? In many ways, to manipulate language. So you know how it works. You might have been on a jury. I don't know. You might have faced a jury, whatever the case might have been. But what you want a lawyer to do is to manipulate the words, the meaning. So, you know, my client is accused of killing this person. So, did they do so maliciously or did they do so in self-defense? Well, how do we define this term? What is self? What is defense? What is murder? Okay, you can question and pick apart and go and zoom in on every particular word and look at all of its different potential meanings in order to construct a reality in the minds of the judge or the jury that may have no actual basis in reality. You can convince them, if you're really good, that a guilty person is innocent, and the prosecutor, if they're good, can convince a jury that an innocent person is guilty. Does that happen? All the time. So that's who Adam Weishaupt is. He's not just a lawyer, he is a lawyer schooled in the concept of Jesuit mind games. And that led later to some of his enemies. In fact, some of his enemies within the Illuminati, within the organization he founded, that led some of them to argue that he was a Jesuit agent, okay, that he was always working for the Jesuit order, and that what he was and that the Illuminati was nothing more than a secularized conspiracy in the service of the Jesuit order. That's what they saw it, because it seemed to make sense in some way. You know, he somehow, that the order, having lost control of the university, put him and other people in it like it to manage it for them, but they're really the ones who are controlling it. So maybe that's all you can say. Maybe that you see is a theory about what lay behind Weishaupt's actions, but it's not a fact, and you can't prove it any more than you can completely dismiss it. I don't buy it, but that's just me. But what we do have is Adam Weishaupt, and we got some, you know, things. It's always this, the thing in history is to try to separate fact from opinion. And those two things get confused a lot because most of history is opinion. It's about it's kind of lawyering. It's, well, what does this event happened? Simple example again. What can we all basically agree on? I mean, someone is going to disagree on this, but World War II happened. Right? So, beginning somewhere in the late 1930s, let's say around 1939, and ending in 1945, although you can quibble with that, there was a massive military conflagration across the globe. And we can identify the countries that were involved and what sides they were on. Those things are facts. something which is roughly indisputable. It's just there in your face. So that's simple enough. World War II happened. Now you get to the tricky question. Why did it happen? Why did those events transpire in the way in which they did? Well, you see, that's nothing about that is a fact. Everything about that is an opinion. And this is why you will some people argue that no, World War started in China in 1937, or it started with the Spanish Civil War in 1936, or was it with the invasion of Poland in 1939, or did it really begin at Munich in 1938? So you can play this game. So there's the war, but and did it end in 1945? Well, it all depended if you were in Germany or Japan, right? Same year, but it didn't end entirely. And was something like the Cold War a different struggle, or was it just the next phase of the Second World War? So while we know about Weishaupt and the Illuminati, we know the position that he held at the University of Ingolstadt. And on the 1st of May, 1776, he formally created, along with I think there were only 5 other people at the time, and I'm not sure whether that 5 includes him at the table or it's him and 5. See, we're not entirely sure. So 5 or 6 people got together in a room, which is how most things start in history. Group of people sitting in a room together, conspiring. And Weishaupt now formed what he initially called the Order of the Perfectibilists. Somebody apparently decided that that was too difficult to say, even in German, or that they didn't. So he decided he was going to change it to something, well, see, you might get a question about that. Someone might argue perfectibilists. Well, what are you going to perfect? What does that mean? But Illuminati, remember, just means that we are the illuminated. It tells you nothing about what the key question is. What have you been illuminated to? So the Order of the Perfectibilists was pretty quickly changed to the Order of the Illuminati. But now here's opinion and not a fact. There's on one occasion where Weishaupt, writing to one of his illuminated brethren, makes the point of saying that our order must never be known or mentioned in public under its real name. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but that's what he's saying. When we never talk about what the real name is. And that makes me, and it has made other people, wonder whether the Illuminati is the name of the order at all, because that gets mentioned. So if we're never supposed to mention our order under its actual name, but nevertheless the term Illuminati is out there, a term which basically tells you nothing, is that the name of the organization, or is it a placeholder? Is there some other name? Do we not even really know what we're talking about? That is, we don't even know what the name of it is. All you're getting is this placeholder tag. So everybody ever since has been running around, freaking out about the Illuminati and never really gets the point that the very name they're using for it isn't actually what it is. Because you see, that's one of the things as a member you supposedly are illuminated to. Oh, this is what we really are. This is what we will present ourselves as being. And the other reason why I think that is a possibility, remember, it's not a fact, it's a possibility, is that Weishaupt is very much about creating an outward appearance of things that masks a reality behind it. So the following year, 1777, Weishaupt joins a Masonic lodge. So one of the things across 18th century Europe is that Freemasonry was becoming a big deal. It was becoming the kind of rich guys club of choice. As more fashionable people joined it, other people wanted to do it. So Freemasonry was spreading across Europe in the upper echelons of society. And it's one of those things that was true then, is largely true now. Freemasonry is not a poor man's club. Okay, get a hold of a Masonic regalia catalog and look at how much that stuff costs. So, and it always has been expensive, and there's a deliberate reason for that, because the expense of membership keeps out the riffraff. There's no interest in having a bunch of peasants or candlestick makers be part of this. No, what you want, you got to keep the commoners out, because those people have a purpose in society, and that purpose is to be stupid and poor and do all the work. I don't want to sound too Marxian about that, but he was up to something. So it's essentially, it's already a secret society that tends to appeal to the elite, and it had been spreading around. And Weishaupt then, after he joins, he then orders all the other members of the Illuminati to do the same thing. So go out and join local Masonic lodges, and he explains why. Is it because he thinks that Freemasonry is cool? Is there something valuable in it of itself? No, he doesn't care about that at all. He says, well, they just do a bunch of silly stuff. Okay, their rituals and beliefs in and of themselves are just, well, stupid. We don't worry about those. But what it is that these lodges now exist, and he makes the point of saying is that they're so common that most people don't think much of them. Now, they're just kind of there. They don't attract too much attention. They generally behave themselves pretty well, and they do stuff which is otherwise kind of meaningless and silly. But what they provide is cover. Because what we're going to do, my Illuminati brethren, is we're going to go out and we're going to join these lodges to infiltrate them and turn them to our purposes, to eventually achieve positions of leadership within them, and then use them as a recruiting ground, because these lodges already contain the people that we want to recruit. And then we will take over the lodge, but to the outside, it will just look like some other group of run-of-the-mill Freemasons. But it will be different. It will be an illuminated lodge. It will be a lodge that is no longer serving any interest of Freemasonry, which we actually despise, but rather it will be under the cover of Freemasonry, carrying out our agenda. So who did Weishaupt want to recruit into his organization? Did he want peasants and candlestick makers? Okay, no, he didn't want those. Those people have no influence. I mean, the most they've got are some, pitchforks and torches. Okay, that wasn't what he wanted. Weishaupt's idea of changing the world, and that's what he's talking about, is a kind of invisible world revolution, a transformation of the whole world order, was not going to be carried out by hordes of angry peasants with pitchforks and torches. Instead, it was going to be carried out by a carefully recruited and indoctrinated elite. So if you look at the ranks of the Illuminati, there's an interesting book for anybody who's interested in this subject called I think it's called the Order of Perfectibilists, the original name, by Terry Melanson, published I think by Tryndale Books. So I'm going to give them a plug. But what Melanson does in this, what he's done is that he's gone through the record of things, and he's found the people who are clearly identified as members of the Bavarian Illuminati. I mean, not ones about which there's some, people who identified themselves or are identified in membership lists. And he's got about, I think there's maybe 450 names. That's not the total membership. That's the total membership was maybe, well, nobody knows, but let's say minimum of 1,000, most maybe 3,000. So let's say 2. A couple of thousand people, not very many. spread over over Europe, even as far as Poland and Russia, but mostly in Germany, France, and adjoining countries. But you've got a pretty good sample there. You've got maybe a quarter of the total membership. And if you look through that, many of the biographies are relatively short, but what you've got here, if you look through it, what do you find? You don't find peasants. You find, first of all, you find nobles. The aristocracy is there in vastly disproportionate numbers. They are aristocrats, they are counts, they are barons, they're dukes, they're princes. I mean, some of these people have their own little countries. You know, you're the prince of a small German principality. And here's an interesting question to just hang on to a minute. How could a prince, even of a small country, be recruited as part of a revolutionary conspiracy? I mean, if the goal of this conspiracy is to annihilate all existing political order, then aren't you actually joining a group which seeks to destroy the very thing that you are? Why would a prince become part of a movement whose goal is to eliminate the entire concept and position of prince? Well, think about that for a while. But you've got nobles, you've got theologians, Protestant ones in particular, who Weishaupt knew were widely attractive, which is kind of odd for someone who is a Catholic. You've got landowners, businessmen, lawyers, lots of those. So that's what you tend to have. You have members of the social elite. Now, why are those the people you want to recruit? Because those are the people who already have two very important things. They have wealth and they have power. So what you want to do is to utilize, to focus their collective wealth and power to the attainment of your common conspiratorial view. That's why you don't want poor people. Poor people have no money, they have no social leverage. Bishops, princes, lawyers, rich businessmen have money and they have influence. Now, Weishaupt also is one of the things Weishaupt is not afraid to do in both correspondence and even in drafting the rules of the order is to make it very clear what he wants to do. So let's go back. What is his ultimate goal? The ultimate goal, he says, is to make men happy and free. That is what does the order exist for? We're going to make men happy and free, but first we must make them good. Here you've got those three terms: happy, free, and good. Now imagine what a lawyer, not to mention a Jesuit lawyer, means by those terms. See, that's the whole thing. That's much of what we go through our life doing. We listen to people say things or we read things, and then we're always going, well, what do they mean? You know, I mean, there's a whole, well, you're British, yes, all right? And
Yep.
I would give the British as being the world's great masters of passive aggression. It's one of those things that saying something which is that a compliment or do they just insult me? I'm not entirely sure. I think there's a certain art in that type of thing. But you know, we know what people say, but the real question is, what do they mean? So Weishaupt himself is always playing around with this, and I don't even think he's being entirely straight with most of the members. Well, one of the things, the Illuminati has different orders in it, so it kind of organizes itself like Freemasonry, is that you're introduced as a Minerval, a kind of candidate member, and then technically most people at the bottom are told that, well, there's just 3 or 4 orders at the bottom, and then you work your way up to being a major Illuminatus, and that's it. That's a lie. Because above that, there are secret levels that only certain people are told about. that are above that. So even within the Illuminati itself, there are most of the people at the bottom think that there are just 3 or 4 orders and that they're at the top of it, and they're not, because there's a whole set of orders, of secret orders, a kind of Politburo, which is controlling the organization. Except the only guy who really seems to know totally what's going on is Weishaupt himself. So we're going to make men happy and free. Happy how? Free how? And that, but first we must make them good. How do you define that? What is good behavior? Well, obedient was one part of it. So, and there's a very strong connection to this. I mean, there's a whole connection between being good what is a good child? A good child is an obedient child, right? Certainly, there were adults who told you that. Behave, do what you're told. That's good. And I think that's pretty much what Weishaupt is talking about. People will do what they're told by the new world order of an enlightened elite, the people who have been chosen because, well, they're chosen. And the common people will simply do as they're told, and they will be happy in doing that. I don't know. Does that sound like, you won't own anything and you'll never be happier and eating bugs is good for you? I mean, was it Klaus Schwab? Is he saying the same thing that Madame Weishaupt said? It sounds vaguely similar, but I mean, I think that's largely what Weishaupt was talking about in terms of making people happy and free and good. Of simply creating a system for them and telling them this is it, this is wonderful, you can't do any better than this. Much in the same way that people who lived in the USSR were told this is the peak of human civilization, comrades. Nothing gets, and it's just going to get better from here. You're living the dream. Okay, which wasn't really true, but nevertheless, all you have to do is convince people that's the case of it. So that's the ultimate goal. Make people happy. Who's going to argue with that, right? What, you're going to stand in the way of people being happy and free? You must be a fascist. There you go. So, but in order to get to there, you have to dismantle everything that currently exists. So the immediate goal, before you can get around to the social engineering part of it, is that you have to destroy the existing order, which meant that our goal, beginning with Masonic lodges, is to dismantle, not violently, but institutionally from the inside, the entire existing political and religious order, and to replace it with another one. And you see, that's why it was so important that you get the people who already have the power, that you get the princes and the bishops and the plutocrats on your side, because they're the ones who can transform this. But he's willing to play all kinds of, he makes an interesting comment. I think this is especially interesting in the 18th century, or observation. He goes that, I think, again, to paraphrase, no one is more valuable to the success of our organization and our plan than women. Okay, so we don't want to forget the women. Now, why is that? Well, he knows that there is no easier way of influencing a man than through a woman. So if we can get the women to support our plans and initiatives, they will then use their influence upon the males around them. But the other reason for it, he knew, was that women, or at least particularly educated women of the upper classes, had a kind of beef. Okay, what was their beef? Well, that they weren't equal to men, that they didn't have more. And remember, this is the 18th century. Women, generally speaking, did not have rights to property or much of anything else. Their whole lives were basically subject either to their fathers, their brothers, or their husbands. And it's certainly not difficult to imagine that among educated women of reasonable intelligence who contemplated their position, they would find things not to like about it. There's a lawyerly description of it. Women were pissed off. All right? So play upon that. Okay, they've got two things. One, they're pissed off. They got a grudge. On the one hand, they sort of hate men, but on the other hand, they can influence men because influencing men is the only way that they can have any particular power. So, and they have ways of doing that. So he goes, what we have to do is we have to get them on our side by offering them the promise of emancipation. So one of the things that the Illuminati stands for is that we don't want just to make men happy and free. We want to make women happy and free. We want to give them equality with men. We want to open all kinds of advantages to them. Now, are we actually going to give that to them? Well, in the next breath, he says, no. Okay, we're never actually going to do that. Because at the same time, he's promising his male Illuminati that in the future, you will be the new elite, but you will also be, this means that you will be the absolute master, the supreme patriarch of your family. So there's going to be no dismantling of patriarchy. Men will still run things. Women will just be turned into sort of shock troops of this plan by being convinced that they will benefit from it in a way in which there's really no intention by the men at the top to do that. But we'll hold out the promise of this, a promise we never intend to fulfill. So he's a good lawyer. He's lying and manipulative. It's using language to manipulate people. It's a fairly insidious plan. The thing is that he's actually pretty open about this because, and why is all of this okay? Remember, it goes back to that concept of casuistry, what he was taught by the Jesuits. Anything in the service of the ultimate good is okay. It has been redeemed from you can do the most awful, wicked things ordinarily, but those are turned into good and positive things if they're all to make men happy and free and women happy and free and emancipated. So that's the kind of grand plan. And the organization did spread, fairly rapidly by 18th century standards. But on paper, in other words, in let's say, historically, visibly, the Illuminati only lasts for about 10 years. So it's founded in 1776. Now, I know someone is thinking, what else happened in 1770? Yeah, it was the Declaration of Independence. Now, is the fact that the Declaration of Independence and the Illuminati in Bavaria were founded in the same year that there's a connection? No, because all kinds of things happened in 1776. Most of them are not connected to each other, but it is kind of interesting. It's one of those things that you should pay attention to. It's one of the things that digress for a minute in terms of general historical research that you need to pay attention to chronology. Now, most of the times if something happens in the same year, it doesn't mean anything because all kinds of stuff is going on. But sometimes it does. So you can use that as a starting point to look elsewhere. So if you tend to find that there's a chronological correspondence between things continuously, then you should look even closer. But don't take the fact that something happens in the same year as evidence that there is some greater connection other than the fact that it just sort of happened at the same time.
So if that only lasted for that period of time, what happened with the infiltration of the Freemasons? Because the Freemasons have lasted a lot longer. So
Yeah.
how was that panned out?
Well, first of all, why did it only last? Maybe it was formed in what was then elected the Kingdom of Bavaria. And what happened was that the Illuminati's writings, the sort of internal, basically Weishaupt's plan was published. It ended up in the hands of the officials of the Bavarian government. Now, how did it get in their hands? There are different stories. There's basically a BS story about there's a guy galloping through the night and he's got, the Illuminati documents and he's struck by lightning and killed, and then the police find him and they find, okay, that's a great story. And because it's a good story, everybody will repeat it. No, what probably happened with this, the most likely explanation is that there was a nobleman, an aristocrat, the Baron von Zwack, I think, von Kiniga, I don't know, but one of Weishaupt's chief lieutenants, a German nobleman, he's one of the ones who began to assume that Weishaupt was a tool of the Jesuits, but what he really seems to object to is that Weishaupt ran everything. Now, Weishaupt was the only guy who knew what was going on, and the view was that I think it's Baron von Kiniga viewed him as being, he was autocratic. He wasn't letting us have any say in what was going on. And the best bet is that this is what happens in organizations. Some underling gets annoyed because they're not getting the attention or promotion or power that they wanted, and then went to the government and handed this stuff. Essentially tried to derail the thing, or got mad and turned on them. But there's another intriguing possibility that I don't discount at all, and it's that the guy, and maybe the person who actually put Kiniga up to it, was Weishaupt himself, that he outed the organization to the Bavarian authorities. Now, why would you do that? Well, what did the Bavarian authorities do when they found all of this? Well, to prove that they had a case against this organization, they published it. So this is what he got. This is what, in a sense, Weishaupt, if he was behind this, got them to. He got the government to promote his secret organization by getting them to bring it to the public's attention. Because prior to that, other people there, we've never heard of this. There's a thing called the Illuminati. See, we keep talking about it to this day. And why do we do that? Because the royal government of Bavaria decided to bring this into public. And that, of course, attracted people. I mean, it horrified maybe most people, but you know what always happens when you start to advertise something? No matter how disgusting it may be, some people are going to like it. It's like advertising you've got the Church of Satan. Anton LaVey did. I got to prove this. Now, most people would be horrified by that, which is what he had actually intended. But there's always a certain minority of people who find out, Church of Satan? That's for me. I'm going to sign up. And there were people who did. And they thought they were actually going to worship the devil and found out the whole thing was a carnival fake. And then decided to split off and form a different organization to actually worship the devil. But no matter what it is, some people will be attracted to it. And Weishaupt's idea was that the right people will be attracted to it. So now we're going to get the government at their expense to print and disseminate our doctrine, and that will bring even more people into it. Now, of course, there's another side of this. The Bavarian government decided they were going to ban the organization. And they did that 3 times. I think in 1784, about 1785, and then 1786. Now, what does it mean if you have to ban the same thing 3 times? Or maybe
Popular.
4. It means it's not working. Okay. If your authority has any real power, then if you ban an organization, it should go away. But it didn't. And they had to get more and more specific. Eventually you just can't. At one point they argue that you can't enlist any more members. If you're an oath-bound society, you can no longer swear any more members in. There's a moratorium on membership. eventually getting to the point that if you are part of this organization or attempt to recruit anyone into it, will kill you. But there's no sign that that had any effect whatsoever, other than that meant that the Illuminati could not operate legally within Bavaria and some other parts of Germany that followed that took up the ban as well. So the question might be, was Weishaupt arrested? Nope, nope. He went right next door to the Prince of Gotha, who was a member of the Illuminati, who let him live there the rest of his life, which was until I think 1830, maybe 1830. So Weishaupt will go on. He'll live for decades. And over those decades, he continues to correspond voluminously with other Illuminati. So they're out there. Was any member of the Illuminati arrested and imprisoned for a long time or put to death by the Bavarian government? Not a single one. They arrested, they picked up some of the chief lieutenants, one a fellow by the name of Johann Bode, and they held him for a while, but probably because some of the people involved in his arrest were members of the Illuminati. See, this is why it's important to have influential people. He got out and he went to France. So none of them. There's no one is arrested. The organization isn't broken up. Because what organization? Where exactly is the organization? I mean, if the organization is other than the members, they're all still there. They're all doing their Illuminati stuff. And so is Weishaupt. So this is where you can say that historically, as an historical fact, the Illuminati was banned, legally ceased to exist to the extent it ever had in Bavaria and other parts of Germany by the late 1780s. But that fact means nothing because the organization is not destroyed. Its membership is intact, its leader is intact, so one must assume that it continues to function. For how long? But then if we also go back to that point I mentioned earlier, if the real name isn't even the Illuminati, then it's simply do business. Or they're going to have the idea that maybe the trick here is that there is no name. I mean, we know who we are. We'll call ourselves the illuminated ones. But other than that, what is the name? What is the secret name of the organization? There is no name. It's any name it wishes to be at any given time. So you see, we join a Masonic lodge and take it over, and we're Freemasons. But we're really not. We're something else. But you notice that when you begin to look at this, it never disappears. So we're left with this kind of question. The Illuminati, as they existed in the 1780s, are never destroyed as an organization, to the extent they even have an organization. And how long then does it continue to function? And when does it cease to function? Well, I have to say that you can't see that it ever does. I mean, Weishaupt died. You got this idea. Does everybody just get bored with it after a while? They continues for another 30, 35 years. Weishaupt dies. All the other original members die. It's just a bunch of old guys writing letters, and nobody's interested in it anymore. Does it fade out like a fashion? Okay. Does it go the way of disco? Everybody's in, was the Illuminati the disco of the 18th century, the conspiratorial disco, and then everybody gets tired of it. Nobody wants to do that anymore. Or does it continue? Well, one of the things that we know is that, and one of the things interesting to me is how widely it was known, and an example of that is in a 1798 correspondence between George Washington, first president of the United States, and a minister in Boston. So this is 1798. The Illuminati had, by this time, remember, has supposedly been out of existence for more than a decade. And so the fellow writes to Washington because he knows that Washington is what? Washington is a very prominent American Freemason. I mean, he never hid that. He's got his whole portrait with the whole kit and caboodle on. So, and the minister himself is a Freemason. And he's asking Washington, as not only president, but also one of the leading Masonic figures in the Republic, do you think that the doctrines of the Bavarian Illuminati have infiltrated and influenced American Masonic lodges? So the first thing that's interesting to me is that Washington and his correspondent both have heard about the Bavarian Illuminati, which I think is an indication that this was not just some little thing that comes out of some minor German state. It had become an international organization. And apparently, in the minds of Washington and others, it still existed and functioned as such. Now, Washington's reply is that he did not think it had made any serious inroads into American lodges. But he does seem to acknowledge that it had a presence there. So there were adherents of this system, which Washington, to make it very clear, thought was abominable. He doesn't like it. Okay, he thinks that the doctrines, he doesn't go into great details why, but he thinks that they're pernicious and abominable ideas, that this is a bad influence, that the doctrines of the Illuminati are a corruption of Freemasonry. And so he thinks it's there, still functioning anyway, but he doesn't think that they've actually gotten control of American Freemasonry or the rest. Now, keep in mind, today we might think, well, there's nothing too odd about some people in the United States knowing about what was going on in Europe, but how are you going to find out about anything in the 18th century? Not through the internet, not via telephone. Someone's going to have to write it down, put it in a letter, put it on a ship, spend the better part of a month crossing the hazardous North Atlantic, and then you're going to have to get it and read it. That's the only way you could communicate that idea. And it's interesting that despite that, the many obstacles involved, it was communicated. Washington in 1798 seems to be fully conversant, aware of the Illuminati's existence, aware of its presence on the American continent, and aware of the fact that he doesn't like it. Now, in contrast to that, let's take another sort of major figure in the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson. And the thing about Thomas Jefferson is that it's unclear as to whether or not he was ever formally a Freemason or not. And I mean, this might be the idea. Well, how do you know whether somebody was? Well, pretty much they have to say it. I mean, a good way to look for any kind of fraternal order associations is in someone's obituary, because that's where it will often be noted. I mean, if you go to a cemetery and it's got a Masonic, compass and square on the gravestone, yeah, that guy was a Freemason. So unless someone publicly declared it, there's no way to know for certain, or if someone mentions this. And as far as I know, Jefferson never publicly declared it, but I will say this: everything that came out of his mouth was entirely consistent with Masonic ideas, and he would heap praise upon the order on different occasions. So I think he was, but it may have been something that he wanted to keep, that he didn't advertise in the way that Washington did. There would be different ways that people would do this. But so Jefferson, even if he was never a member of a formal Masonic lodge, was well versed in Masonic ideas. And what was his view of Adam Weishaupt and the Bavarian Illuminati? Well, he considered Adam Weishaupt to be a great philanthropist. He thought it sounded pretty good to him Okay, this guy sounded like he was really, he wants to make men happy and free. So how can we have any real complaint with that? So here's another interesting point. The Illuminati, at the dawn of the 19th century, 10 years or more after they supposedly were put out of business and we never were supposed to hear from them again, were acknowledged to exist by George Washington and by Jefferson. And here you have two major figures in American politics and Freemasonry who have completely opposing views about it. One who thinks that it was a pernicious evil, that's Washington. Another who thinks that it was a kind of philanthropic organization which was going to do wonderful things. You can find other evidence that the Illuminati's influences and the French Revolution. So I mentioned this guy earlier, Johann Bode, which was the secretary of the order, the sort of arguably the second most influential person in it, a guy who's always in contact with Weishaupt. Where does he go around 1786 after he's kicked out of Bavaria? To Paris, to France. What happens in France 3 years later? 1789, the French Revolution. So what Bode basically did as secretary of the order was to move the administrative headquarters, if there was one, to Paris. And there were already illuminated lodges there. Lodges in which members of the Illuminati had taken important roles. And one of those illuminated lodges was the Nine Sisters Lodge in Paris. A lodge to which the cousin of the king, the Duc d'Orléans, belonged. This was going to become a center of revolutionary activity. And who else belonged to that? Well, Benjamin Franklin, Voltaire. That is, there were figures in the American Revolution who were members of an illuminated lodge in Paris. So, what do you want to make out of that? I mean, that doesn't prove anything, but it's interesting to note. Again, there are these connections between them. And this is why then later you're going to get, if you look at two works that also appeared in 1798 and 1799, you get a book which was published, I think, in Scotland by John Robison called Proofs of a Conspiracy. And in that, he purported to argue that basically the Illuminati, working through the Masonic lodges in France, had instigated and led the revolution. Around the same time, in fact, almost at exactly the same time, in 1798, a Jesuit priest by the name of the Abbé Barruel wrote a book also dealing with what he called the history of Jacobinism. So remember, by 1798, the most radical phase of the French Revolution had come and gone. And his argument, again, was that the radicals in the French Revolution, if not the whole revolution itself, was also part of an Illuminati conspiracy worked through Masonic lodges. Those works, I would argue, are the first modern works of conspiracy theory. That's what kind of got the whole ball rolling. There's a lot of interesting debate as to whether or not Barruel and Robison came to the same conclusions separately, or in some ways they were subtly influenced by the same things. They weren't really in communication with each other. There were probably common sources that influenced them that opinion. But again, what was the opinion at the end of the 18th century? That the Illuminati was alive and well and had played some kind of function in the revolutionary upheaval in France. And then you have other groups, after the fall of the Jacobins, after Robespierre lost his head, and before Napoleon comes along, some of the radicals, some of the defeated radicals in the French Revolution, people like Gracchus Babeuf, another fellow with the name of Buonarroti, were involved in, and they formed a thing called the Society of Equals, and attempted to seize control of the French government again under something called the Conspiracy of Equals. And what did they acknowledge? They acknowledged that they were following the plan of the Bavarian Illuminati. That's what they were inspired by. And that work went on, Buonarroti's work went on, and later people who admitted being inspired by the Illuminati were Karl Marx. And it was so if you look, this is the interesting argument. If you look subsequently at what in the early 20th century was the goal of Marxism-Leninism, you say communism generally. What was the communist goal? Well, it was to eventually replace all existing political and religious institutions, to sweep them up, dump them in the dustbin of history, and replace them with a one world system of an enlightened elite, which was the Communist Party. And what was communism ultimately aiming to do? Was to make all men happy and free. Right? It's going to be a utopia, from each according to his, needs, from each according to his abilities, to each according to their needs. It's going to be a communist utopia, comrades. That's what we're going to get. And the whole idea was said that whatever serves the interest of the revolution is good. In fact, this was the marching orders. The first head of the Soviet secret police, Felix Dzerzhinsky, a good Polish Catholic and once considered becoming a Jesuit priest, basically said, the people asked him within the Cheka, within the secret police, what do we do? And what are essentially is the whole logic of the organization? He said it's very simple. He got this from his Jesuit teachers, the same place that Amasov did. Whatever serves the interests of the revolution is good, because the revolution itself is the ultimate good. So nothing can be evil which serves it. In the same time, anything or anyone who stands in the way of the revolution is evil and must be destroyed. So now go out, round up counter-revolutionaries and shoot them, because they're standing in the way of this. And don't worry about any moral implications, because this is all in the name of the revolution. So I don't know what that proves, but I do think that it's interesting that you have a movement in the early 20th century which seems motivated by very much the same kind of idea and operating in much the same way. You can even find this in the evolution of communist parties. One of the things that if you look at, let's just take Lenin and his Bolsheviks, certainly at the top of it, one of the things you don't find when you look through prominent Bolsheviks, you don't find a lot of peasants. In fact, you almost find none of them. And remember, Russia was that country at that time that was 80% of the population were peasants. But they're kind of there. You don't even find workers. That's the main thing. They were supposed to be the party of the proletariat. Well, go through the ranks of the Bolshevik leadership, Lenin and his comrades, you don't find any bronze steel workers from Izhevsk. Okay, they may form the lower ranks of the party later on, but they're not part of the old. What's Lenin himself? What's his social origins? He's a hereditary nobleman. Now, true, his family got hereditary status because his dad was basically a glorified school superintendent, but that's the way it worked in Tsarist Russia. But he was a nobleman by birth. If you look at the rest of them, you tend to find out that they were mostly from the upper or sort of middle, generally the sons and daughters of professionals. Exactly the same people that Weishaupt would argue that's what it is that you want to recruit. Where did the early Bolsheviks do most of their recruiting? Well, the same place where Lenin got radicalized, at universities. So universities would be the place to do that, because that's where, well, arguably, at least the more ambitious and often, well, intelligent, whatever that means, people are going to go. So you don't go recruit for the party out in villages. You don't want illiterate peasants. What you want are people like Lenin. You want people already from the upper class who are going to be trained as, what was Lenin's professional training? A lawyer. Always lawyers in these things. So
You've had you've got a few questions coming about the Illuminati. Am I okay to give you
yeah,
some
yeah.
viewer questions, and
Oh,
then we're
yeah.
going to go over to MK Ultra if we've got enough time. All right. So Crikey wants to know: are the Jesuits at the top with the Vatican?
What do you mean today?
Yeah.
The Jesuit order was restored to he was restored as a holy order in the early, again, I think it's something around 1815, although you could look at that and get the exact date. I don't know. There's a question here. Do they actually secretly run the Catholic Church? Well, some people allege they do. That was what was alleged back in the 18th century, that they had become a power unto themselves, and that the head of the Jesuit order was, some terms used, he was the Black Pope. He was, and this made the meaning that he was the illegitimate or secret Pope. Was that ever true? I don't know. Who does? Those are allegations that are leveled. Today, you will find that the Jesuits are still very important in education. I mean, they're not out battling the Reformation directly anymore. Right? They're not out exhorting people against. They're not actively trying to turn back the wave of Lutheranism, or to return the Church of England to the bosom of Rome. Or are they? Why would? Or are they just carrying out? The Jesuits, safe to say, are still an important element or constituency within the church, but I wouldn't make the argument that they run it. But there's also something else which has changed. And I know that this may be heretical to loyal Roman Catholics out there, and I don't mean any offense by it, but let's face it, the church ain't what it used to be. Popes don't have the power that they used to have. I mean, popes used to be able to excommunicate kings, and the kings would eventually come and ask for forgiveness. That hasn't been the case in, for what, 1,000 years, several hundred. I mean, the real test of this was back in 1870, when the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed, when Italy unified, and the Pope was opposed to the idea. And in fact, it took all of his, the Pope used to rule much of central Italy, and that just got taken away from him. And he pronounced all kinds of anathema and excommunications, and said Catholics can't have anything to do with this new government, and no one paid any attention. He couldn't wish the Kingdom of Italy away, and eventually had to end up making a deal. Eventually the Vatican makes a deal with Mussolini to keep the tiny little Vatican state. That's it. So the church has lost, and in many ways, the power that it once had. So if the Jesuits are the dominant element within the church, they would have become a dominant element within an institution that's no longer as influential or as powerful as it once was.
Okay, well, let's go over to MK Ultra then, please, because that was a conspiracy theory once upon a time, and now it's got its own Wikipedia page.
Well, MK Ultra is one of a series of secret domestic operations carried out by the CIA, ostensibly for about 20 years, from 1953 to 1973. It's one of those things, like everything else, that once you begin to look at it, once you begin to unpack things, you find that there's a lot more there than you knew was going on. And also you find out that MK Ultra was formally the name of this set of operations from 53 to around 63. After 63, in internal documentation, MK Ultra is pretty much phased out in favor of things like MK Search and MK Often. The MK prefix, CIA has its own kind of naming system for things, but an MK prefix basically represents that this is a domestic operation. It's not worldwide. And largely focused in the States or in Canada, which they practically treated as part of the US. But it was preceded by other things and it was followed by them. But really, everybody knew that MK Search and MK Often and the others were just a kind of bureaucratic reshuffling or renomination of the whole thing. In the same way that MK Ultra in 53 grows, it's an expansion of something that was called Project Artichoke. And Artichoke grew out of something called Project Bluebird. And that in terms probably had its origins in a post-World War II operation called Chatter. You know, there are others involved. So there's always this periodic renaming of things. Partly, I think, for the purposes of deliberately obscuring something. So that if anyone was trying to look into this, and by that I mean opposing intelligence agencies, they would become confused by the change in names, and they wouldn't know whether you were talking about one thing or whether you were talking about different things. And that's exactly what the purpose of it would be. So is this the same thing as that? Is this still going? And it does get awfully confusing because, you know, one of the things that I long held to be a fact was that Artichoke, Project Artichoke, which was the origin of MK Ultra, that when MK Ultra, when the renaming process went on, Artichoke ceased to exist. But it didn't. It seems to continue to function as some kind of entity enclosed in or separate from MK Ultra. It's not clear, all the way into the early 60s. So something you thought had become something else is still there in the background. So whatever, in a way, whatever Artichoke was doing, it continued to do parallel to MK. And MK Ultra, again, included probably at least 50 sub-projects, and some people have argued 150 sub-projects. So it wasn't one thing. It was a nameplate. It was a kind of boilerplate title for a whole vast array of different sub-projects that were going, most of which we know nothing about, because in 73, the order of the then CIA director, particularly when Congress was starting to ask unpleasant questions about, you know, things that you were doing, especially domestically, ordered all of the formal records to be destroyed. Now, see, technically, officially, that was just for the conservation of space. It was recycling. See, we have all of these papers, we don't need them anymore because we stopped the program. This is the basic argument. We stopped the program. It never achieved anything of significance. So we didn't need to save any of this stuff. So we burned it all. See, that's all there is to it. Now, what's the other possibility? That you were afraid of mounting congressional scrutiny that would reveal the criminal activities that were carried out under it. And were there criminal activities? Oh, yes, there were. And you burned the stuff so you wouldn't be accountable. Some things do survive. Which of those is more likely to be true?
The one
I
that
would
is
say
the
the
most
latter.
insidious.
More likely to be, because there is a, first of all, they know that they're engaging in. Well, let's go back to 1947, the National Security Act, NSA of September 1947, that creates the Central Intelligence Agency. And one of the things which is included, I think it's section 102C. I won't swear to that, but I think if you can look at it, that's the basic charter for the Central Intelligence Agency. And one of the things that is noted in that is that the agency is not to have any police powers, police or judicial powers, nor are they to conduct intelligence operations on American soil. That actually, what it says is that they are to have no domestic security role. I remember how lawyers can play around with that. Now, what that basically means is it's often said that, well, there's a thing that says that they can't spy on Americans. No, actually, it doesn't say that. And there's also absolutely nothing says that we can't use American citizens as guinea pigs to test drugs on without their consent. No, it does say you're not supposed to be involved in any kind of, internal security operations. But if what we're doing is carrying out scientific testing, that's not I mean, does it mean that you're essentially dosing people, you're getting people and drugging them without their knowledge to then wait around and see what happens to them? Is that illegal? Yes. Okay. But we could kind of quibble with that type of thing. But it means one of the things that it means they can't do is they can't arrest you. CIA can't arrest you. The CIA can't question you. They have no police powers. They can't issue subpoenas. They can't take any kind of legal action against you. Now, of course, they can get other people to do that for them. So they may not be able to arrest you, but could possibly members of the agency convince the local sheriff to arrest you? Yeah. Okay. That doesn't mean that it can't be done. It just means that it won't be done directly by them because they can't directly do that. In the same way that the agency will make a habit, and MK Ultra is a part of this, of using people from other agencies or what they call contract personnel. And these are people who are hired usually through some front. Okay, they don't get a check from the Central Intelligence Agency. That defeats the whole purpose. They get a check from, I don't know, Ramjack Industries Incorporated, some sort of front company. And that's where the money comes from. But the money ultimately comes out of the CIA budget. So what happens if anything's caught of this, these people never worked for us, which is quite true. They never worked for the agency. Now, did they work for a subsidiary or front company funded by the agency? Maybe, but that's not the same thing. So they can say with absolute legal certainty that this person was never a member of the agency and never worked for the CIA. While in fact, that person did in fact do our bidding for money through other ways. So they get, but again, what's this based on? What's the CIA there to do? It's there to protect national security. It's to keep Americans happy and free. And that's the ultimate goal. And anything that does that, anything that enhances our ability to fight the hydra-hided villain of communism, and they're all out there drugging people, you can be sure of that, is good. It is sanctified by the greater cause. There is a guy who played it. Nothing gives a better sense of the mindset of some of these people involved. There's a guy named George Hunter White. And he actually starts out as an officer of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, what eventually comes the DEA. And George Hunter White is an interesting guy. And I wish I had the regular quote at hand, but he was once asked, about his act. And so he then becomes one of these sort of he's still technically a Federal Bureau of Narcotics guy, if anybody asks. But he's being paid by the CIA to to supervise programs. The most famous one was a thing called Operation Midnight Climax, which is one of the best names ever. So what was that about? Mostly it was centered in San Francisco, California. And one of the things that MK Ultra, this is a sub-project of this, very interested in, is that two things they're fixated on: hypnotism and drugs, and how we can get those things to work together. And especially, well, psychedelics. So they've got, like 1 billion doses of LSD, not that many, but they've got a lot. They buy LSD from the Sandoz labs in Switzerland by the pound. And they're really interested in what this can potentially do. So what we need to test people. But it only works if people don't know they're being tested. Now, see, that's a whole different sort of thing. People who get together consciously and drop acid know that's what they're doing. They have chosen to do that, and therefore they expect something to happen. In fact, you'll be really disappointed if nothing happens, which occasionally is the case. But the real test of this would be to give acid to people who don't know that they've been given acid. And then what's they're going to what if this, these things happen and you don't know where they came from? Very often people will freak out because the television's moving, they don't know what's going on. But how can we possibly use that? So to get a real gauge on this, people can't know. But you don't want people who are ever going to talk about this. So this is what Operation Midnight Climax was. What it is that then Hunter White would go out and he would hire prostitutes, hookers. And the hookers would then be given the LSD. And there was a room, and usually there would be an adjoining room in which he and his buddies would sit, and there would be a window or a mirror in which they could see what was going. They had cameras set up to film this. The hookers would go out, they would bring their customers back. They would, on orders, dose them with a certain amount of LSD, and then everybody would sit around and see what happened. You're scientists. You're collecting data. So this is what happens when a 200-pound adult male is given a certain proportion of LSD, and this happens over, and what kind of differences are there? And they did this kind of testing with LSD and other drugs. Now, what was the point here is that if any of these Johns start to complain, if they catch on, well, you were involved in criminal activity. We can arrange to have you arrested for soliciting prostitution, So do you want this known? Remember, we have film of you with the hooker. So if you have any suspicions about this, you're going to shut up. Perfect plan. But George Hunter White was once asked, sort of why he did these things. And again, he's the quote, but he goes, he starts out by saying it was fun to labor in the vineyard. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, cheat, kill, and steal with the absolute blessing of the all-powerful? And that's interesting to me because, at least in his case, and I don't think he was the only one, is he doing this in the greater service of the country? No, you just got a license to do whatever the hell you want with impunity. Nothing is going to happen to you. And you can mess with people, violate their constitutional rights from one side of the country to another, and nothing's going to happen to you. And it's fun to do that. You have, there's been some commentary, interestingly, about, I think if you look at some interviews with people who are or who claim to be ex-CIA, they'll talk about the recruiting ideas, that one of the things the agency often looks for, at least in operational agents, are people who are kind of sociopathic, maybe even slightly psycho. George Hunter White would be an example of that. The guy was, he's He's a Federal Bureau of Narcotics agent and a CIA agent, but he's also, in many ways, sort of inherently criminal and amoral. But you would have to have that. Um, it's a bit like the writer John le Carre, David Cornwell, I think is his actual name. He was right, again, was recruited into British intelligence and noted quite openly that one of the first things he was told is, well, if you're going to go into this, you got to do two things. You have to be willing to do two things: to lie and to kill. If you can't do that, then this is not the line of work for you. So that's, you have to have a flexible morality. You can't get too hung up over things are good or bad. You basically do what you're told. And if you enjoy this type of thing, if your idea of luring guys with prostitutes and then dosing them into LSD and sitting around filming what happens, if that's your idea of fun, you're our guy.
Which ties into honey traps then, because there's many theories about Epstein being a honey trap. What are the history of honey traps in intelligence? Does that predate all this MK Ultra stuff?
I mean, when was the first time that they used a pretty girl to lure a man into doing something stupid or foolish? When did that first start? Place, I don't, it's Stone Age. All right, that manipulation has been going on forever. In the same way that there's nothing new about spying. There's nothing new about sociopaths or psychopaths. Those people have always had they end up generally in positions of political leadership. So, well, that's one theory at least. And it's a kind of disturbing theory. Is that if you look at the whole kind of history of political leadership among human beings, we were generally governed by psychopaths. I don't know. Does that make me feel better? I'm not entirely sure.
What do you think about the theory that Epstein worked for intelligence, setting up honey traps?
Well, if he wasn't, someone should have been paying him to do that. I mean, the guy was collecting look at the people he was dealing with and look at the kind of information he was gathering. And one of the things certainly about him is that he was a man who was sort of into these things for money. He always had that. One of the more interesting things about Epstein that struck me is that in high school, allegedly, people have said, he was not a particularly, he wasn't unpopular, but he wasn't one of the cool kids. He wasn't a jock. What was he? He was a kid who was good at math, who would do homework for money. So if there was somebody on the football team or somewhere else who was serving in math, well, he'd do your homework for you, and you paid him, and you were glad to do that. See, he ingratiated himself to people in higher social positions. You make friends with the jocks and the cheerleaders by doing their math homework for them. And that's the way that he sort of operates through his life. He ingratiates himself to powerful people, to some way gains their confidence on them. I mean, even back when he was doing, allegedly, math homework for people in high school, he had something over them because they were cheating, weren't they? And so if he was caught, they were caught. So he's just a guy who leveraged that kind of advantage. And then later, when he was working in finance, what did he specialize in? What did he do? Tax dodging. Rich people came to him and said, how can I avoid paying taxes? And he would find kind of legal means for them to do that. Well, they really like that sort of thing. See, he's just expanded doing math homework to now tax dodging. And then eventually that goes on. What's another thing that really rich people want? Oh, young girls. Okay. Or young boys, whatever they want. and I'll provide that to them in a secure environment on my private island. Does it work? Yes, it works. So certainly there would have been intelligence agencies aware of him in what he was doing, simply because they were often monitoring the same people that were his clients or friends. What are they? Are they clients? Are they friends? Well, see, that's never clear with someone like Epstein because he's always buddies with the people he's in business with. But ultimately, they're clients or not friends, or they're marks, something to be exploited. So what you can prove is that Epstein did these things. He had a client. He was friends with lots of people. He had a private island. He sex trafficked young women. That is seemingly indisputable. Now, the question that becomes, what did he do with that? And he filmed it. That's something else. He was recording this. Now, one argument is that he was filming all of this stuff to protect himself because, at some point, some of these people might come back at him and he'd have something on them. Is that why you're filming everybody? Was that sort of, I mean, the reason why it's a bit like this. If you rent an Airbnb and then simply find out that the owners had installed cameras throughout the place, they're doing that because that's a routine thing that they're doing. Those things are there deliberately, and it's there to record everything. Now, in their case, they would argue it's there to to watch. If you claim something was broken, we can see all the damage that you're doing to our house, or what we really want to do is watch you and your wife have sex. But we're gonna but there are cameras everywhere. Watch people in the shower, on the toilet, whatever their particular type of thing might be. But what Epstein is doing is entirely deliberate, and he had saleable information, and he's not stupid. One of the things about Jeffrey Epstein, another very interesting thing, very telling thing that he said, I think this is before he ever got caught. It says being smart doesn't make people good. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be. It's an interesting, those are, if you think about it, the most dangerous of human beings. People who are smart, which of course covers a lot of waterfront, but what does that practically mean? It means that they can outwit or outmaneuver most people around them. And then the decision comes, to what advantage can I use that ability? I can make people, this is the thing, people who have a knack for talking other people into things and making him think it was their idea or that this is a good idea, but often sort of using their wits or whatever it is to manipulate other people. And there are some people who do that, but there's some people who just decide that I'm just going to use this entirely to my particular advantage. And I have to think that Epstein pretty much was including himself in that. I may be good with math, but that doesn't mean I'm a good person. That just means I know how to do the calculations. It's similar to something that certainly Epstein never said, but it's always this little saying which is sort of stuck with me. And it is kind of unpleasant, but it's, like many unpleasant things, true, that when one talks about the voice of reason and of being guided by reason, Now, not being guided by morality, but being guided by reason. We tend to think the voice of reason is a good thing. And it was once pointed out to me is that the voice of reason isn't the one telling you to show mercy. The voice of reason is the one telling you not to leave any witnesses. Because that is the so that's an idea again that reason can lead you to that kind of conclusion. That reasonably, the safest thing to do is not to show mercy, but to kill. So don't trust reason. It's similar in some way of saying that being smart doesn't make someone good. In fact, it may have entirely the opposite effect. I guess maybe sort of on the MK Ultra thing again. MK Ultra and its follow-up programs are supposed to have ceased in the early 1970s, and I would argue don't believe that for a minute. Okay, in the same way that I wouldn't believe. I mean, maybe they didn't get anything useful out of this, but really, you continue all of these programs for 20 years and you don't get anything out of it. One of the things I think that happened after the congressional hearings in the 70s is that a lot of these type of activities, one of the things that the CIA never wanted to be caught doing again is that with MK Ultra, you could trace it back to them. I mean, look, they've got the records of it. They've got a name for it. They've got the records in their archives that they had to destroy. So you don't want to do it that way. You want to farm it out. You want to have it done by things like research institutes that you fund. So I don't know. Let's say the Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto. That through intermediaries, lots of money will be channeled people there to carry out research, which we're not directly connected. You can make no direct connections between us and them, but in effect, they're then doing it for us. So my strong suspicion, which again is not a fact, it is just a suspicion, is that really those programs or any parts of them that were functional continued on under other names and other means and probably still do.
Dr. Rick Spence, this has been absolutely mind-blowing. We've learned so much from you this evening. Some people are asking in the chat whether you've written any books that they could follow up with.
Okay, so what things can you do? Well, I have written books. The ones that would probably be most interesting to people here would be Secret Agent 666, Aleister Crowley, British Intelligence, and the Occult. So did Aleister Crowley have any connection to intelligence? Well, actually, yes. Yes, he did. That was one of the things that he claimed that he did. And I would say of all the people I've studied, Crowley actually turns out to be one of the more truthful. He's telling the truth at least 50% of the time. So that's one. Another, which I think is probably out of print at this point, is called Trust No One, The Secret World of Sidney Riley, which is a kind of deep dive into early 20th century intelligence and skullduggery. The most recent book is Wall Street and the Russian Revolution, not Anthony Sutton's Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, but it's a kind of expansion of that. That's kind of near to my heart because it deals with my main interest in the Russian Revolution. Other things that I have done that may be more accessible than books, if you're interested, there is an outfit called The Great Courses. You can go in and Google that. And I do video series for them. And one of them is The Real History of Secret Societies. Another is Crimes of the Century. The most recent is Secrets of the Occult. And then I will have another one coming out, I think, probably early next year, called Great Villains of History. So those are all available there. I think also if you have Amazon Prime and you go through it, you can find some of my series there. And then last but not least, a friend and I, a fellow by the name of Stephen Austin, have, well, what do? We just started a podcast because apparently everybody has to do that. It is called Strange as It Seems Podcast, and you can find it on YouTube and on Spotify and wherever podcasts are at. We covered some of these same sort of topics there. So anybody who's interested, take a look. And that's about
Yeah,
it.
so I've just put both links. I've got the Great Courses link and the YouTube link. I put them in the live chat, folks. They're also in the description box if you're watching this on replay. So I've used many of the great courses over the years. They're phenomenal. They bring you the top lectures, and I've listened to them over and over again and learned so much. So it's a phenomenal resource. I can't recommend
They've
it
got
enough.
courses on everything. So if you want to
Everything.
learn about secret societies or ballroom dancing, okay, that would be the place to go. Oh, somebody might notice that above my head through this, and maybe it's backwards where you can see it, there's a little thing there that says Illuminati. Okay, and I have that deliberately there so that I can make it appear over my head. But just let me explain that what that comes from is a wine box. Apparently there is was a wine company in California called Illuminati Wines. Are they connected? I don't know. And a student actually gave me the wine box, and I cut that out and put that above my head just to freak people out.
I'm going to put the links out there again. Have you done anything on Iran-Contra, Klaus Barbie, that kind of thing?
Not really. Iran-Contra isn't something that I've made it a research interest in that way. Klaus Barbie, I know something about, but again, that's not in terms of ex-Nazis running around.
Yeah.
The Klaus Barbie, did Hitler escape to Antarctica and go to the Hollow Earth and ride dinosaurs, as certain films have alleged? That's a good story. And see, this is the type of thing that historians always kind of have to grapple with, is that we're always going up often against a good story, because the good story almost always wins. Well, which is the better story? I ask you, the one that has Hitler riding a dinosaur, or Hitler not riding a dinosaur?
What's the name of your YouTube channel again?
Oh, my podcast is Strange as It Seems.
All right, I'm just trying to find out because they're saying in the chat that the link we've got isn't working. Let me just Strange as It Seems. I'll just get
Well,
that.
you have to look for Strange as It Seems podcast, because Strange as It Seems is used by other things, since it's a common phrase. And
yeah, you've got the all-seeing guy logo.
Yep.
All right, I'm just putting this into the description box now and the live chat as well. So this link should work. I've got it right in front of me on my computer. And put a 1 in the chat if you'd like to see Dr. Rick Spence return, because I think we've just scratched the surface. Put a 2 in the chat if you've heard enough and you would rather he bogged off. Looks like it's all ones, my friend. Yeah, so we'd love to get you back at some point, but really appreciate you spending this time with us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been fun, and if you want me to come back on, let me know, and I'm sure we can work something out.
We would love that. I'm going to close the show and let you go. You have a great day, my friend. Take care.
You too.
Cheers. Thank you. Right, folks, that was absolutely riveting. All of the ancient history of the Bavarian Illuminati, the Freemasons, the co-opting of the Freemasons, and then how the agenda spread around the world, even to the US presidents. I've learned so much. Just letting you guys know what we've got coming up, because there is quite a lot. Some of you were asking where the Billy Jasper podcast went to, the Essex Boys one. Dark forces of censorship forced it down, but now it's back up. Just went back up a few hours ago. Tomorrow night we have got at 7 o'clock Kevin Annette, King Charles strips Prince Andrew's royal titles. Trump ousting Pope Leo is the title that Kevin requested. Then we have got on Wednesday, is this Wednesday? Yeah. Ex-Satanists and the Road to Salvation with Christian Ross. I think we've got stuff coming out every night this week. Next one is on Thursday morning, because the lady is down under. French model Laurie Marsden exposes elite, including Jean-Luc Brunel, and she's got stuff to say about Epstein as well. We've got Ryan Dawson coming back on Saturday afternoon at 1 p.m. to talk about Prince Andrew and Epstein. This is what I'm talking about, folks. We have got a huge week. And Shane, the guest booker, he's back. He's got his mojo back, and he's lining up even more as we speak. So get ready for these shows. Wherever you are in the world, hope you have a good night. And I'm going to go spend some time with Baby Z and Jen. Take care.